Hello, and welcome to Making Creativity Pay, the podcast where we talk to people in creative industries about how they promote and market their work. I'm Dan Barnett, and on this episode I spoke with comedy director and promoter Katie Palmer of Tacks Comedy. We discussed the skills she brings to a number of performers at the Fringe, her work with Red Bull on creating the Tacks debut fund. We talk about her aim to reduce a lot of the gatekeeping that exists around the Fringe and the difficulty even Scottish acts have in affording to perform at the Fringe. I started by asking Katie to give a quick introduction to herself and Tacks Comedy.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm Katie Palmer. I'm a comedy kind of producer, promoter, director, bit of everything, based in Edinburgh. And I'm a huge comedy fan. I think that's like an important part to say in all of this, that I do all of these things because I love comedy so much. I've always been a comedy fan. And I run Tacks Comedy, which is a mixture of a few different things at this point. It's a comedy production company as well as a place for kind of comedy recommendations and to celebrate and spotlight all comedy happening in Scotland, and a sort of hub for supporting comedians and resources and things, and trying to support as many people as possible for free to kind of get to the masses. So there's a few different things now, but yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah. What was the spur to start Tacks?
It was a few different things that all came together at the same time and at the right time, I think. So it was my love for comedy. I think I've been a comedy fan for my entire life. It was one of those things that I loved so much that I didn't even fathom that there were jobs in it. Like, thought it was just a thing to watch and love. And then I'd been working in comedy for a few years, kind of starting right before the pandemic and into the pandemic, which was a weird time. And so I had been kind of full-time working in comedy for about a year. Oh no, sorry, less than a year. And anyway, decided to do something to support comedy. A comedian friend of mine once told me that I should be stand-up comedy's agent, which kind of stuck with me as like, I just continuously promote comedy to people who are like, well, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of comedy. And I'd be like, that's crazy. Everyone should be a fan of comedy. Come and watch comedy with me. And I had also just started directing, which was another job that I could not believe existed. Like, just an absolute dream. Had started directing, and also kind of selfishly, I really like working for myself and managing my own time and being like kind of self-employed and that type of thing. So started Tacks Comedy in January last year as a long-term plan. I thought it would be a fun Instagram page to talk about how much I loved comedy and to celebrate Scottish comedy and comedy happening in Scotland. And I thought that in maybe 5, maybe 10 years, it would function as a production company. And then by March last year, it was functioning as a production company. So it all happened very fast. So I was kind of ill prepared for that, but really excited, and have now taken that and ran with it, which is dead exciting.
Yeah, because it's just kind of, a lot of people I speak to, they talk about, for want of a better phrase, solopreneur, or they have to have many hats, they have to do all these kind of things. And there's always this kind of balance between, obviously, there's not huge amounts of money in the scene generally. So every time you have to kind of use a designer or a photographer or a director or anything like this, it's all money going out. But it's almost impossible for you as an artist to be the best designer, the best director. You can't do all these things yourself. So there's always this balance between being able to do it yourself and also get in the right help. I mean, how have you found kind of working with people? Are they like kind of, I like this bit, but I have no idea how to do this bit, and then you can kind of plug their gaps, as it were?
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, that's kind of, as I said, started directing, but it was through working with, so it's Grace Mulvey that I first started directing, and it was through having conversations with her, because I was obviously directing the show. I wanted the show to have the best possible chance at the Fringe. So we would just chat, and I would kind of go like, oh, so if you applied to this venue and this venue and this venue and this venue, and she would go like, oh, no, I didn't realise that there was all those different venues, and like just the way that we would talk about Fringe, and I didn't realise how much information about the Fringe that I had just picked up from being a person who lives in Edinburgh and from working Fringe bars when I was 19 and doing all of those things. So then, kind of plugged those gaps there. And I think particularly with the Fringe, writing a show and whether you need a director and like whether you need a tour promoter and stuff is a bit more, arguably a little bit more black and white. But with the Fringe, it just feels like there's so much knowledge that you have to have. And the more comedians I speak to, the more I think it feels like this kind of really gate-kept thing, that there's all this like Fringe knowledge that everyone keeps to themselves. And I think I mean that probably is happening, and I'm sure there's some sinisterness happening, but I also think it's like, I just didn't realize that not everyone knew that. Not in that sounds pure like arrogant, not that like, I didn't realize how smart I was, but just like, I didn't realize that because I live in Edinburgh and I've gone to all of these Fringe venues for my whole life, that I know where they all are, and I know where all the footfall is, and I know that your Fringe title has to be really good because people are going to skim through a brochure and it'll be between you and 10 other shows in a 1 mile radius at that exact time and all these things. So that kind of how I started doing this, is realizing that I had some of this knowledge, and as you said, a desire to learn it, which a lot of artistic people don't have. They just want to write jokes and be really funny and be really talented that way, and don't want to learn how to be a business manager and a social media manager and a marketer and PR and all of these really scary things.
I mean, you said about that one with Grace last year. Do you think it kind of needs that kind of? It's almost like a full-time job running. You know, people kind of think from the outside, you know, it's just August, but in reality, if you're doing a show at the Fringe, it's probably at least 9, if not a 12-month plan and a big chunk of work beyond that month.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with the Fringe, you're applying for venues probably January latest, arguably from like October, November. And like, I mean, I'm not a comedian. I've never been a comedian. For as much as I love comedy, I've got no interest whatsoever in ever performing comedy. But even just, so like, Grace, for example, did so many work in progress shows up and down the country. And, you know, is then every work in progress show you're doing, you're critiquing it and sending it to me, and I'm critiquing it, and we're working on every single work in progress that she did. And and then she's also trying to continue her day job and continue performing in clubs, because that's how you earn an income, and trying to do all of these things. So on top of that, to then be reading every 7-paragraph email that the venue sends you, that there's a deadline in paragraph 6 that's in 3 days' time that you didn't notice, and like all of this really difficult stuff alongside the Fringe. And there's, the Fringe is one of those things where you could always be doing more. So you could be doing more than anyone else, but you could still be doing more, and that's really difficult to manage as any person, but especially as a comedian, to know you could always have done one more work in progress, or you could always have sent one more email to a reviewer, or it's hard to stop.
Yes. I mean, there's probably loads of, as well as, like you said, the directing side and the artistic side. There's an awful lot of admin, and you know, nobody likes admin. And you know, there's a lot going on. You know,
I love admin.
All right, almost. Nobody loves admin. You know, there's things like I hadn't really thought about. You know, when you kind of looking at all the stuff in the Fringe about you know, liability insurance about the venue, you kind of think, well, you know, so every artist, you kind of think, you know, if I was, I think, well, where would I look for that? How would I go with that? You know, what's a good price for that? You know, if I'm just a stand-up and there's no juggling chainsaws or anything, it's very basic. You know, how much is a month's liability? Because obviously the venue itself's got liability. It's just liability. You know, where do you go? How much? You know, all those kind of things that, like you said, if you know that, that's an easy thing. If you don't know that, that could take you a day. You know, it could really eat up. And it's the kind of thing you kind of think, oh, I'll look at that next week. And then it's probably middle of July and you haven't got it sorted.
Yeah. And then insurance companies probably know to put the price up at that point too.
One of the kind of things, so I've talked to a lot of people around the Fringe and that kind of stuff. And, you know, is it the be all and end all? And people both love it and hate it. I think the actual thing itself of being with like-minded people and, you know, all that art in one place, you know, you can't move for someone doing something creative, but it's kind of on the flip side, it's just a financial sinkhole. And, you know, the concept of kind of giving up your life for a month for a lot of people is, you know, for some people it's impossible anyway, and for others it's very difficult. I mean, is Fringe still where it's at? Everyone kind of says, you know, oh, it's going to be the death of the Fringe this year, and it never seems to be. It's like house prices bubble's going to burst, and it never does. It just kind of keeps going.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm definitely very much in that camp of I love it and hate it. It's So I'm from Edinburgh, but I left Edinburgh. And the reason I now live in Edinburgh is because of the Fringe. And every August, I would come home and stay at my mum and dad's house and either work at the Fringe or go to the Fringe or both. And every August, I would go like, I'm going to move back to Edinburgh. I love it here so much. And then in September, I'd be like, nah, that's fine. I'm going to leave again. Like, I love the Fringe with all of my heart. And yeah, everything you've just said, it's like, I'm sure I will not be the first person to say this, but it's like, it's kids camp for comedians and people who love comedy where everyone's in the same place and hanging out. And I've met some of my favorite people on the planet in the Fringe. It's the best. I met my boyfriend in the Fringe. Like, it's the best thing on the planet, and I hate it with all of my heart too. Like, the way how inaccessible it is and is ever becoming, and it worries me. I kind of try not to think about it because I feel like I will see the death of the Fringe in my lifetime, or maybe not the death of it, but it'll change beyond recognition, I think. But then, exactly as you said, we say this every year, and it's always fine. And everyone complains about it and then gets there, has a great time. But yeah, that it's something that really worries me, and I feel like I was probably around the Fringe when it was like at its peak and what it was supposed to be, but I would have just been 19 working at the bar having a great time. I wasn't like, in the industry in that type of way. So I feel like I missed out on the best years of the Fringe. But yeah, definitely for acts, everyone has a different opinion on this. I don't know if it's the be all and end all in the way that it once was. I think like we can, even with like winning an award, it's an incredible thing to win an award. And I don't mean to take anything away from anyone who's won an award or been nominated for an award, but that's not like the career maker that it maybe once was. It's a really nice kind of sign of approval from your peers or from the industry. But yeah, I don't think you need to do the Fringe. I think it's a great way to become a far better comedian, but I don't think you need to do it.
And I mean, one of the ways you're helping with that is this sponsorship with Red Bull for a Scottish or Scotland-based comedian. This will be too late, obviously, when this goes out, that it'll have closed. But if you want to talk a little bit about what that is and how it comes into, did you kind of twist the arm of someone at Red Bull, or kind of how hard was that to get over the line?
It was difficult in that I did loads of work for it, and then I kind of got lucky right at the very end. But I'm telling myself that if I hadn't done all the graft, I wouldn't have got lucky. But yeah, so it was an idea that I had last summer, kind of like in the lead up to the Fringe and during the Fringe, which obviously was too late for last year. But just to go like, yeah, everything. I think obviously I've always been a fan of comedy, and I grew up in Scotland, so I've always been such a fan of Scottish comedy, and it's just become ever clear to me in the past couple of years, and not that this is a new problem, I was just late to figure it out, but it definitely feels as though Scottish comedy is overlooked at the Fringe in many ways. And I will absolutely admit that I was part of the problem for a while. I was one of the people who, for years and years at the Fringe, I would only ever go see Scottish comedians because they were the comedians that I liked. That was who I was a fan of. And then I kind of went like, oh, I should stop doing that because I'm missing out on, I can see them anytime. So I'll go see like everyone else is up for the Fringe. And then I spent a couple of years, like maybe like 2 or 3 years, and went like, oh, I haven't seen a Scottish comedian at the Fringe. Like so I say that to say I realise how easily it's done. But I think audiences aren't the only ones doing it. I think reviewers are doing it, and journalists are doing it, and the award folks are doing it. And just, yeah, definitely last year it felt like, again, not everyone who won an award deserved it. And statistically, there are thousands of people who deserve to get an award who don't get an award. But this year especially felt like there was a couple of Scottish shows that were not nominated that should have been. Like, I couldn't even possibly name them all, but like Roscoe McClellan's Sudden Death, and like Liam Withnail's Chronic Boom, which was the year before and did again. Like, there were just so many shows that were so excellent and got nothing. And it feels as though with Scottish comedy, with Edinburgh Fringe being in Edinburgh, there should be a disproportionate amount of successful Scottish comedians, like in the industry and in London and everywhere. Everyone in London should be going like, how come Live at the Apollo is 50% Scottish comedians because of the Fringe? And that isn't the case. So, and I also spoke to, after I'd kind of had this idea, had written this sponsorship pack, and I also thought, I love admin. Like, my skill set is admin and organisation. I come from an events background. So it was kind of like, okay, what can I do to make a tiny little dent on this problem? Well, I'm good at admin. So I'm going to write a sponsorship pack, and I'm going to send it. I sent it to over 100 different businesses like Scottish based and beyond. And I thought, maybe some gin company that's like based in Scotland or is female founded or something will chuck me a bit of money to put their logo on the poster, was what I thought. So yeah, I sent this to over 100 businesses and got 100 no's, and then spoke to Red Bull, who were just so great. Like, I'm still astounded by how great they are. They're so cool. They're such a cool company. So just even the way that they treat it, if I was them, I would want all the credit and I would want to be shouted about everywhere. But they're like, oh no, it's your thing and we're supporting you with your thing. And it's just like such a cool way of doing it. So they've been fantastic. And so, yeah, obviously applications closed today, so it'll be too late. But I've had applications coming in and it's essentially just a funded Fringe opportunity. So definitely, obviously, once we pick a person, we'll be shouting about them until August. So it will not be the last that everyone hears about it. And I just really hope that people take a punt on someone that Red Bull's backed. Like, I think that's quite an exciting thing. I've heard a few comedians joking about becoming a Red Bull athlete for the summer and stuff. Like, I just think it's such a cool company that, and hopefully the project itself, I kind of want to use the project to spotlight that if Scottish comedians can't afford to go to the Fringe, then that's a crazy problem that we have. Like, it's just such a strange problem to be facing, that Scottish comedians who aren't even having to face the accommodation costs can't afford to pay the registration fee and the venue deposit and the like marketing costs that a venue makes you pay, let alone your own marketing, all these things. So if Scottish comedians can't do that, then that's a problem. And if I shout enough about Red Bull and that as a problem, then I hope that audiences go like, oh, there's that name that we saw that Red Bull were talking about, let's go take a punt on them. And hopefully it'll just give someone a bit of a platform to continue to hopefully come back to the Fringe or to tour or just to be kind of elevated in the industry in some type of way. So I'm dead proud of it, but I now cannot believe I now have to pick a person. And that's the next thing that's terrifying me, because I've obviously not even read half the applications, but they've all been so good, so I'm nervous.
Yeah. And so are Red Bull planning to get involved in August itself?
Yeah, I think so. We need to finalise all those plans. This basically all I'd been in conversations with Red Bull for a while, and then we kind of got the go ahead right before Christmas. So, and obviously with the Fringe timelines, like, it already feels a little late in that it's going to be kind of mid-February by the time someone's confirmed, and then obviously we need to get them a venue and everything. So between myself and Red Bull, we've just kind of gone like, oh, do the applications and then we'll figure everything else out. But yeah, they've always kind of been involved in the Fringe, but they wanted to elevate what they're doing. So yeah, we need to finalise all the details, but I have an image in my head of like some Scottish comedian on a Red Bull truck in Grassmarket handing out flyers on a microphone or some. I'm sure we'll do some mental stuff. But yeah, so we need to finalise all of that, but we'll definitely come up with some weird stuff to do.
On a similar kind of thing, there's the Keep It Fringe Fund, and it was interesting you kind of saying about the timelines. I've kind of thought, if you were thinking of doing it, 2,500 it is from the Keep It Fringe, it would make the difference. It's almost kind of too late now. You kind of wanted that back in the probably last summer. You almost want 12 months notice to kind of say, because if you're committing now, if you haven't committed yet, you've kind of you're maybe missing out on some of the venues. You're probably missing out on some of the accommodation. It's kind of hard. And, like I said, it is a 12-month thing. I mean, have you worked with anyone on their Keep It Fringe applications?
Not yet. I've been looking at it. I've sent it to a couple of people this year. Because again, I think, and it's funny because I bet people think this about the Red Bull thing, even though I hope that they wouldn't think this. But with the Keep It Fringe one, it's one of those funds where you go like, oh, there's no point. Like, but then last year I feel like I sort of did this and then saw people win it, and you go like, oh yeah, okay, like this is actually a tangible thing that you could get. I
mean, I was listening to Tom Mayhew on the Proper Class podcast. They talk about kind of working class people in creative industries and stuff, and it was just, he kind of said, effectively, it's kind of happened for him to some extent that, you need to put so much money up front that that kind of almost stops you. But you knew that if you had that money up front to be able to do it, at the end you would make a profit because you're confident in your work and everything. But that's the thing. There's so many people who you have to pay for accommodation, you have to pay registration, all that kind of stuff. You have to pay your guarantee on the seats before you get any income, and then the income doesn't come in for several months afterwards. And also speaking to Laura Horton on episode that just came out, it was almost with Summer Hall, it was almost going to be, well, no, there is no income at all. And, there's all kinds of things, if you're relying on that, you're thinking, well, I'll get that in 6 months' time and I can pay my bills with that. And then it doesn't appear. There's all sorts of risks involved. And, you can completely understand why some people go, well, no, I can't do this. And like you said, even people in Scotland where there's so many things that they can't even entertain it.
Yeah. And as you said, it's the timelines. Like with any other show, like, if you're just putting a show on at a like the Glasgow Comedy Festival or a tour show, or just putting a show on at a comedy club outside of anything, then especially if you're at kind of a certain level, then I feel like most of your kind of marketing costs are maybe a month, 2 weeks out from the show, because that's when people are buying tickets. So that's when you want your social ads and stuff on, and then you get paid from the venue a week after the show. So you can stick that on a credit card, and that's like, you don't even feel like you're in that debt. You spend a couple £100 on a paid ad, it's on your credit card, and then you get paid from the venue and it's all paid off and it's fine. But with the Fringe, and I completely understand why the venues need that money so early. That makes sense to me, but that's just part of the broken system where no one's benefiting. But I understand why all the venues need that money up front to then go pay their suppliers to build the venues and all of this stuff. But it means that for a comedian, you're paying huge bills in like January, and you're getting your venue settlement in November. And that's such a huge time to be down $6,000 or whatever the total costs are, and with no guarantee that you get the money at the end. So it's a terrifying investment. And you just have to pray that it pays off.
So with your kind of promoter hat on, I mean, if someone was kind of, had an hour looking to debut, would you say, no, just do like the odd bit of jumping on other people's bills and kind of, do a bit of network in Edinburgh, but concentrate on the other festivals? Do people kind of, it's always difficult. You have to have confidence in yourself, and you don't want to kind of waste a year as it was. But, is it almost better to kind of do, half a dozen, 10 of the festivals around the country across the year? So you're kind of like spreading out the cost, spreading out the risk, rather than trying to say, yes, I want to do, a month at 10:30 in the morning in the middle of nowhere in Edinburgh.
Oh, that's a good question, and that's such a difficult question. I think I'm going to contradict myself. For all of that I have just slagged off the Fringe, I do think that performing for an hour for 26 days in a row, like, there's nothing else that can match that for making you better at what you do. And Fringe audiences are awful. Fringe audiences are terrible. So like, if you can perform for 26 hours to an audience that their attitude is, well, impress me then. Like, that's so hard. So nothing will match that in terms of making you better at what you do. I think depending on who the person is, if you can afford to do the Fringe, and again, afford is a difficult thing, but if you can afford to do the Fringe, you should do the Fringe. Don't do it at all costs. Don't go into wild debt to do it, to, as you say, be at like 10:30 in somewhere mental. But I think, and that's, again, this might be me, I feel like every opinion I have about the Fringe, I can so easily see the other side of it. But I think the free Fringe is so underrated, and I think with the way that things are going, I could be completely wrong, but I personally feel like there's less of a kind of gap between like, oh, you're in a paid venue, so that must mean that you've had the stamp of approval and you're the best act at the Fringe compared to the free Fringe. I think there's so many fantastic acts who now do the free Fringe because they make money on it, and like, why wouldn't you do that? So I think there's so many ways to do the Fringe that it doesn't have to be with a $4,000 PR bill and in a venue that takes 40%. You don't have to do it that way anymore. But I do also obviously love all the other festivals across the country. I think I could be wrong that the Fringe is the only one where you kind of do the whole run. I think everywhere else you're doing like a show or two. So it's just so different and still so worth doing. And I also work at the Glasgow Comedy Festival, so I of course have to mention that. And I think that's a great festival, and it's really affordable in terms of the kind of entry fee, registration fee. That's what I'm trying to say. That's, I think that's the lowest out of all of the festivals. I could be wrong. Maybe don't quote me on that. But yeah, I think it's kind of worth doing both for two really different reasons. I skirted
Yeah.
that question entirely, I believe.
No. I mean, the honest answer. My day job, I'm an analyst, and if someone asks me a question, the honest answer is it depends. There's always so many things.
Yeah.
There's so many inputs. There's so many things that kind of reason. And is that difficulty? Is the Fringe show a thing in itself? Are you doing it to then go on a tour? Are you trying to find that one person who's doing the commissioning for Radio 4? There's all these kind of different reasons why you might be doing that show, and so yes, it's difficult. It's a risk, and that's always the other side as well. Once you bring commerce into art, does it end up ruining it? But from so many people I've spoken to, it's always the artist that gets the smallest slice, and everyone else makes a nice regular living out of things, and then the artist who's actually doing the work, taking the risks, is just gets what's left.
Yeah. Even though they're the product.
And I mean, almost, do you have to kind of, when you're working with people, do you almost have to get them to kind of think, the show is one thing, but then everything else is, like you said, a product. So I mean, you worked with Amy Annette recently. She's just had a few nights in Soho. How do you kind of work with Amy or other artists about kind of saying, well, this is what you need to do to promote the show. This is our, do you end up having like a marketing plan? We kind of say, we need to blitz social media, we need to do this, that, and the other on mailing lists. I mean, how detailed does it get?
Well, I'm a nerd, so it gets very detailed. But that's maybe a me. Well, yeah, I guess that's why people get into promoting rather than performing, I guess. Certainly, the way that I like to do things is to. I actually have everyone in the Glasgow Comedy Office was slagging me off for my Notion template the other day because it controls my entire life. I have goals for every month and I have a template for everything. So I have kind of like a marketing campaign planning template, which I love to use to go through everything. So for Amy's Soho Theatre, and Amy's also on tour in May, and Soho's sort of part of the tour, but just the way that the dates are, it's a little bit earlier. So we treated kind of Soho as a standalone. And yeah, I like to go through mental comprehensive marketing plans to confirm like key messaging and like people's what's the motivation to see Amy Annette if you've never heard of her, and what's the barrier to see Amy Annette if you've never heard of her, and how do we flip that, and how do we convince people to buy a ticket and things. I kind of like to see it. So with Amy's Soho as an example, that Amy's responsibility is to get the people who already like her to come, and my responsibility is to get people who've never heard of her to hear of her, is how I like to kind of divide the workload, basically. So for Amy, and Amy's always incredible on social media, even though she does not think she is, but her, like, the content that she does, and she did a story, like Instagram takeover on the Soho Theatre Instagram. She did like a magazine style quiz with the Soho Theatre followers and like all this like silly stuff that I love so much. And it's such a like, Amy as a comedian is someone that is so hard to not fall in love with. Like, you just want to, she's one of the type of comedian that you just want to spend an hour with her. Like, you'll pay a ticket price to spend an hour with Amy in it. So yeah, so she did a lot of her own social media stuff, and then I'm more looking after like the paid socials and the email campaigns, and working with Soho on there, because they, they've got so many marketing opportunities. So we did a couple of like paid things with them and some organic things with them, but yeah, that's kind of how I like to see it anyway. And I will, I do spend a lot of my time nudging comedians to post on social media, and it's become a bit of this, even with the Red Bull thing. I was like, oh god, I know how social media engagement works, and I'm gonna have to film my own face because the algorithm likes a face, and no one cares about my face. I'm not a comedian, but I want this to algorithmically perform well, so I'm gonna do the thing that I continuously tell comedians to do, and they hate being told to do it. Where I'm like, you're gonna have to film it to camera, and like it's awful. But yeah, but I just think that's as we've said, and as I'm sure you've said with other guests, that it's that if you're a comedian and you just want to write a really good show, and then you've got someone going like, hey, will you post on social media again? And will you post on social media again? And like, it is tricky. And their social media followings who are following them for their jokes and for their content, who maybe don't live in London and don't want to be told that there's tickets at Soho Theatre, and it can kind of mess with their algorithm if they're trying to push stuff. So that's where I step in to do the salesy things and stuff. But it's a difficult balance, and I'm still fairly new to it and getting that balance right. And it's really dependent on who the act is and what their social media following's like and their engagement and stuff. But yeah, I think a good way of looking at it is my job is to get people who've never heard of them to hear about them, and their job is to sell to their followers, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Talking about admin, so one of the things I noticed you've got is a couple of Fringe guides, so both in terms of what you need to do when, and then also on the budgeting side. So it sounds like, you really enjoyed putting those together based on kind of what you were talking about, that you kind of they're kind of really detailed, and it's kind of, yes, you're kind of removing the gatekeeping of a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and yeah, they're probably too detailed. I'm so aware. That's one of the things I have to get better at, because I want to go like, oh, I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything I know. And then I'm like, people don't want to read a 6-page document about budgeting, but I like to write them. But yeah, this is kind of one of the things that I'm really keen to do with Brass Tacks Comedy, and I'm obviously trying to figure out the best way to do it is to help as many people as possible. And it's a fine line for me, because obviously I want people to pay me to help them, but not everyone can afford that. And even if everyone could afford that, I don't have time to be paid to help everyone. So I'm trying to figure out ways to, support as many people as possible, even like a super kind of light touch. Here's a couple of free downloads. But yeah, I just think particularly with the Fringe, as I said, there's no one way, like this is the way that you do the Fringe. There are 100 different ways that you can be successful at the Fringe. All of them take slightly different tactics and everything. So, and I'm also trying to get better as now a self-employed person who runs a business at shouting about things, really. And it's that, and I've had to convince myself, like, you don't have to be the number one leading world expert in a field to be able to teach someone else something. And that's what I'm kind of trying to get better at, because I go like, oh, I don't know everything about the Fringe. Who am I to tell anyone else how to do it? But it's more so, or hopefully these guides have been written not as a like, this is the way that you have to do it, but as a, here's a list of things you're going to need to think about. And with that list, you can then decide how to do each thing. But like, have you thought about this so that you don't, as you say, get to July and go like, oh, insurance and like things like that. So yeah, I've done a kind of generic Fringe overview, Fringe survival guide, as I've called it, which could probably have a less dramatic name. And then I have just launched a budget specific one. And I think I'll do more. I think a sort of marketing overview one a bit in a couple of months' time, Fringe specific, because marketing or promotion at the Fringe doesn't work like how the rest of like marketing or promoting anything else on the planet does. So doing stuff like that. But yeah, I just kind of want to share as much information as I have in my head. And one of those like cheesy things where like if one person finds it helpful, then like I feel like I've done something good for comedy. And it's something I want to grow on as well. If people have found them interesting, then figure out ways next year to do like workshops or like, kind of produce a group of comedians together for far less money or for no money, and just figure out ways to be helpful. I just didn't realise how gatekeepy the Fringe is. And as I say, I don't know if it's sinister. Maybe it is sinister. But I think for a lot of people, even people who are really successful at the Fringe, know and understand that, did they actually get lucky? Is there a way better way of doing stuff that they've not figured out yet? And like, I just don't think anyone goes like, oh yeah, I nail the Fringe every year. So it's like, if no one feels like that, then let's all share our secrets. And as I said, to hopefully those guides aren't specific to Scottish comedians in any way, but if I can help Scottish comedians or working class comedians or more female comedians or not non-white comedians, and like just to help anyone who feels like they don't have someone to ask those questions, then that's hopefully what those guides achieve. That, or I just overwhelm everyone more because they're all 6 pages of in-depth writing, which no one necessarily wants, but at least you can go back to them. If you skim it, then you know in future that when a venue or whoever asks you to do a thing, you go like, oh, I think that was in that guide. I'll go back and look at it.
I mean, one thing I'm interested in is the kind of the bucket speech. So you mentioned Roscoe. I saw his show on Next Up, and he had a really good bucket speech, and the way he kind of did it. And then some of the others I watched, like Amy Gledhill, both great shows. But that bit where a couple of minutes before the end, you're asking for money, she was a lot more kind of nervous about that. Whereas I thought Roscoe did a great bit about kind of he kind of put it in and then finished with a song, which was interesting. But it kind of the whole dynamic was really nice, because I know Monkey Barrel in particular, the prices are low, and in return you're asking the people to kind of chip in, so it can make a difference. And it's a completely different skill set to the show itself, and especially depending on the topic of the show, that can be quite difficult to kind of shoehorn in asking for money, depending on how it goes. And so it's that in itself is a really big skill that can make a huge difference to kind of how your month goes.
That's a good point. That's something I'm gonna write. There's gonna be a free download specifically about the bucket speech. That's a great idea. But yeah, because it is, and I feel like I once venue managed a venue that was that kind of similar split that Monkey Barrel do, where the tickets are cheap but there's a bucket essentially, and picked up some really good bucket speech tips. So now I'm absolutely gonna share them. But yeah, I think so many, especially in the era of card payment. And so I completely understand what the balance is and is supposed to be, which is everyone should understand that a Fringe show ticket is £12 to £15. But if you want to spend a £5 or £7, whatever, to guarantee a seat, then you're supposed to pay the difference at the end. Like, that's supposed to be how it works. But I think people go like, oh, great, we got a cheap ticket. Which, obviously, in the Fringe, ticket prices are another part of the problem. And the audiences aren't really winning either because they're getting charged expensive ticket. Like, no one wins at the Fringe. So if audiences can only afford a £5 or £7 ticket, then it's fantastic that there's that option. And it's tricky when, like, even when I'm at the Fringe, and I should know better because I know that artists need paid for their work, but the quantity of shows that I want to see, I'm like, God, it's really expensive to pay for all of these. But yeah, I obviously saw Roscoe's show at the Fringe, and I believe gave him like all of the money I had because I loved the show so much. And Roscoe, being the nicest guy in the world, was like, don't pay again. And I was like, no, let me pay for 4 more tickets. I loved this show. But you need a really good bucket speech, and you need to be able to explain to people that actually what they've done with their £5 was just secure your seat. Like, there's more to pay for. But yeah, it's also a great model that if you did sit there thinking the show was rubbish, then you can sneak out and go like, oh yeah, we paid the £10 option or whatever. Like, yeah, I just think it's great that all these things exist, but they're so hard to manage. And begging people for money at the end of performing an hour of really personal art is for 26 days in a row. Like, that's so difficult. Yeah, you just have to see it as part of the show. Just perform it like you would perform any part of the show, is perform the bucket speech. And like, because it's like, yeah, not everyone can afford a £12 ticket, but you hope that those people understand who they are and that they can leave guilt free, and that everyone else you guilt into paying for your art, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. 'Cause, I mean, that's such a difficult. There's so much great stuff that you can have for free. I mean, one thing I'm looking to do go forward is kind of make a list of all the YouTube specials, because there's probably hundreds now. I mean, I know Next Up Comedy have got a list of kind of stuff on theirs and stuff on Sky and some YouTube stuff, and you know, it's a good list, but it's nowhere near comprehensive. You know, the number of great artists who've got hour-long YouTube specials now is enormous. That's that kind of thing. How do you compete with free? It's almost kind of saying to someone, you know, yes, this is free, but if you like it, please give me some money.
Yeah. Or I think, and this doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but there's definitely been many of those free YouTube specials that do kind of blow up. And whether they maybe already had that following and all those people just kind of came out the woodworks and you can actually see the physical views, or whether it is a bit more kind of algorithmic and engagement led, and people, I think with comedy especially, maybe arguably more than any other kind of like art form, it's you're selling your personality to a certain extent. Obviously you may have like a kind of character or an exaggerated personality, but to sell yourself as a product. But there's people get such a personal connection to a comedian because they've just spent an hour with them, with this person, telling their like deepest, darkest secrets and all of the things that they're ashamed about or embarrassed about, or personal things that happen to them, even if it is kind of like just jokes, which I do in quotes because I love a just jokes show, but that's, you know, can sound derogatory to be just jokes. But even those shows, when it is just jokes, you're still learning so much about a person and their beliefs and everything, that if you get to watch an hour for free, then I do think those people are then more likely to go see them when they're on tour and stuff. So but yeah, it is that, how much do you put out for free? Because you can't measure the outcome. Like, you know, like I feel like Mike Rice is a great example, and I might be doing him a disservice. He was already doing great before his YouTube special, but I think that did really, really well and kicked him on even further. And I'm sure he can measure that now his tours shows are in bigger venues, but you can never quite put it down to, was it that YouTube special I put out for free, or was it just some viral clip, or was it the podcast, or you never really know. So, but yeah, I completely understand that's, as a creative person who's creating all of this art, you have to judge how much of it to give away without being able to measure the impact of any of it. Yeah, in the era of like YouTube specials, I think it's absolutely worth putting content on YouTube. Not too early. I think a few comedians now go like, oh, that's the thing we're doing, so the first hour that I ever write, I'm gonna record it professionally and put it out. And like, you're gonna hate that hour in a couple of years. Even if it's great, you're gonna hate it in a few years. So you don't have to go rush into this, but if you have an hour that you like, then like record it, stick it on YouTube. It seems really worthwhile at the moment.
So from your promoter side of things, I mean, would you say to an artist to say, you know, this is a great way of doing it, or would you say just have half a dozen little 3-minute clips that you kind of pump out, you know, just take little selections, rather than, you know, maybe the show as a whole hour is asking a bit much and it's early doors, but there are half a dozen really great 3 to 5 minute bits in there that you think could kind of, for want of a better phrase, go viral?
I will caveat with it depends. But yeah, I think there's actually someone that I'm working with at the moment who we've gone through that exact discussion. So they've recorded an hour with the mentality of it's for clips, like it's to build a social media following and everything. And they're going through like the edit, and I went like, oh, but you'll also get an edit that's the full hour, right? And they were like, well, no. And I was like, no, but you might want that in the future. And I was like, and you know fine well that even in 2 years' time, if you decide to put the full hour out, the last thing you're going to want to do is go rewatch that hour and get a good edit of it. So do that now while you're going through the editing. And I think this also, again, this is just my opinion, and I'm so like, I love hearing other people's opinion on this because I change my mind all the time, but I do think in the crowd work era, in the era of crowd work clips, I think the concept of like burning your material is changing, and I don't know if that's as important as it once was. Where, you know, it used to be that once you've released an hour or half an hour or whatever, that you now cannot perform that live anymore because everyone's seen it. And I think that might just be like a hangover from the telly days, where if your half an hour of comedy went on a TV show, then every single person in the country would see that. Where now it's, even if you've got whatever, say 10,000 followers on Instagram and you put a clip out, what, 10% of your following are even going to see that? And even those people who see it quite like hearing jokes. I certainly like hearing jokes more than once. And maybe that's because I work in comedy, but I think even comedy fans now, there's a bit of like, oh, do that bit that we like, that we've all seen on because it went viral. Like, I think there's a bit of that. So it's, but even as I say that, I'm not entirely sure that's the case, but it's worth experimenting with if you're a comedian. I've heard enough comedians now kind of say that they've had this clip go viral and then will continue to perform it in clubs, and people still laugh like they did before it went viral. And is that because they didn't see it, or is that because they did see it and they really liked it? Or like, and even, you know, my boyfriend, for example, who will watch comedy because he loves me, but he's not a comedy fan, and he will leave a comedy show and I'll be like, oh, what did you think about this joke? Did you think that word could have been? And he's like, what? I don't know. I laughed. Like, I don't remember anything other than laughing. Like, where
it just kind of washes over him.
If you work in comedy, you go like, yeah.
You just get a vibe.
Yeah. And he goes like, yeah, that was great. Yeah. Like, yeah. And he'll sit with like, especially if we go to see a comedian that like I know and I'm friends with, then afterwards we'll like sit and dissect everything. And he's like, what? Like, I just don't remember any of that happening. But it's funny to speak to like people who don't watch that much comedy, who just don't care about these things that we think are like the most important dilemmas in like in the modern day art, and like no one cares. So yeah, again, I've skirted your question, but I think putting clips out is a great way to grow a social media following. But I think have an hour in your back pocket. You don't want to just put it out and no one watches it, because like that probably messes with some type of algorithm out there. But I think once you've put things out in clips, that doesn't mean you then can't put the full hour out, for sure.
Looking at end of January now, you've got plans for the Fringe. Are you fully planned, or do you have spaces to kind of take on other people, or will you just kind of, you know, pretty much always say yes, regardless of whether you've got space or not?
So, funnily enough, I'm trying really hard to not do that, because I am absolutely the type of person who would do that. But I do think, and you know, with something like the Fringe, I feel really strongly about, if you're going to kind of take on like a client, for want of a better word, that you have to have the time to give them everything. And I overcommit at the Fringe every year with like various jobs and stuff. So I've been quite strict with myself this year, especially as much as I produced shows last year. I was also still working other jobs. So this does kind of feel like this will be the first year that I work kind of full time for Brass Tacks comedy in the Fringe. So I'm being quite strict about the number. I think 6, maximum 8 shows is in my head. Of that feels like the number that I can still give everything to, but also the number that I don't have to hire anyone yet, because I think hiring someone is something I want to do well, and I want to give someone else the chances that I've been given. And because, you know, we've obviously talked predominantly about performers, but like there's so much in the, like there aren't enough female promoters, there are not enough female producers, like and that's just, you know, I go straight to gender because I'm a middle class white lady, so gender's the one that I talk about the most. But like, we need more working class. We need more of all of that representation in the behind the scenes as well. So if and when I hire someone, I want to make sure that I do that properly, and I'm not too busy dealing with artists to deal with them and give them a really good experience. So I think, yeah, 6 to 8 shows. So I currently have 4. So I'm halfway to maximum, and I've obviously been having a lot of conversations with people and stuff, and just trying to get the balance right. And I change, and this is just my own insecurities, but I flip flop within seconds of going like, what if I can't find enough people who want to work for me? And like, and then everything's written, then go like, oh, I don't want to say yes to anyone yet, because what if the biggest names in comedy come a calling? So but yeah, so Fringe isn't entirely planned yet. It's half planned, and that includes like Amy and Grace coming back, which is great. And we've kind of got a template that worked, so it's rolling that out again, and then new acts, and then the Red Bull person who isn't a person yet, but that'll take up a lot of time. So, but yes, I'm trying to not say yes to everything and everyone as much as it's tempting.
I mean, you mentioned Liam earlier, and he was a guest a while back now. So he and I think a lot of other people now have kind of take the view of kind of like a 2-yearly cycle. So they'll either just perform every other year, or they'll perform the same show for 2 years. So they might do a full month of it year 1, and then, half a dozen shows of it year 2. Do you find that a lot more, that people are kind of, it is crazy. I mean, when Jay Lafferty was on, she was kind of saying, nowhere else does this kind of thing where you kind of, write a new show every 12 months. That's, and you have to, in a lot of cases, have to really mine your personal experiences as well, and craft it and workshop it and everything else. That's a lot to do every 12 months. Do you find that a lot of people now are more kind of looking at doing a 2-year cycle?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that, and also the realization that you don't have to do a full run is, at the Fringe specifically, seems to be becoming quite well known. That like, I think it was, I'm sure, I don't even know if this is the case, I've heard that being credited to Sam Campbell because he won an award on a short run, and everyone then went like, oh, so we don't have to do 26 days? Like, crazy. Like with Amy and Grace as an example, they both debuted last year, and I think both immediately, like I know Grace specifically, we went out for lunch like during the Fringe. She was like, I've got a great idea for next year's show. And I was like, oh God, like do this year's show first. But she moved on immediately, and I think it is that kind of the really terrifying nature of bringing your first ever show to the Fringe. And I think she, and I'm putting words in her mouth, she hasn't like said this, but I feel like she kind of then went like, okay, cool, right, okay, I know what to expect now, and I can do this, and I'm dead excited to do it again better. But not to say that she'll do that every year for the rest of her life. I'm sure she'll hit a point, and I don't, maybe it takes like a bad Fringe or a bit of Fringe debt to make you realize you don't have to do it. But no, definitely, I think you don't have to write a new hour every year. If you've got the drive to do it, then there's no harm in doing it, but it's not essential, I think. And again, I don't think audiences go like, oh, well, we saw Grace in 2024, but she wasn't there in 2025, so we're not going to bother in 2026. Like, audiences don't notice or care about these types of things.
Thank you so much for your time on this. It's great to chat. Just to kind of finish off, if you kind of say, where people can find you, and if there's still those spaces, what kind of things you kind of work with, and kind of, how you can help people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, the best place to find Brass Tacks Comedy is on Instagram. I kind of half posted on some other social medias and then realised that I was not being passionate about it at all. So the other ones exist, but Instagram's where I actually post. So it's just at Brass Tacks Comedy. And on there's the links to all the downloads and stuff, and the newsletter. There's like a weekly email newsletter, which is kind of a mix of for comedy fans and for comedians. There's kind of 2 sections within it. But certainly if you have comedy fans that listen, then my target audience for the newsletter is people who would identify as comedy fans but feel completely overwhelmed by it, like, or maybe people who go to the Fringe every year but don't really know where to start year round, and to just like to talk about comedy that's happening and comedy that I like and why I like it, so people can go like, oh yeah, cool, like that's the type of stuff we like too. Or like, I'm never reviewing, that's never like stars or my critique of the show. It's just like, oh, this person's cool and this is why I think they're cool. So newsletter's a great place to kind of start with like the content and stuff. And yeah, if any comedians are listening, I think my email address might be certainly on the newsletter, but DM and anything. I really like hearing feedback from people, positive or constructive, of what, if you are a comedian who's benefited from those downloads, then like what else would be helpful, or if you downloaded them and didn't benefit from them, like if no one has explicitly told me that they're in too much detail, and I think someone's might need to message me that to realise that I need to summarise a bit better. But yes, Instagram, newsletter, and yeah, DM or email. And I'm super happy to chat to anyone who has questions about the Fringe or just wants to bounce an idea around as well.
Thanks again to Katie for taking part. You can find more details in the show notes about Brass Tacks Comedy, their how-to guides for the Fringe, and where you can see Brass Tacks acts at the Fringe. Thanks for listening.